Clara, a story from Boston. 1. Morning in Boston. My name's Clara. I'm 32 years old, and I live on the north side of Boston, a quiet part of the city where the buildings are old, the winters bite hard, and the air always smells faintly of sea salt. When I wake up in the mornings now, it's to silence. The kind of silence that lingers, not heavy, just there, like a presence I've made peace with. Most people who meet me today wouldn't believe I used to work as a maid. They see the coat, the house, the calm, and think I've always been this woman. But I wasn't. 3 years ago, I was cleaning someone else's floors. I worked in one of those old brownstone houses near Beacon Hill. Tall ceilings, marble everything. The kind of place where even the dust feels expensive. The man who owned it was named Henry Alden. He was kind, but quiet. Maybe too quiet. The kind of man who made you lower your voice without realizing it. When I first started working there, I didn't know much about him except that he was wealthy and widowed, twice. People in the neighborhood whispered that he was cursed, that every woman he ever loved ended up buried too soon. I didn't believe in curses. I believed in rent, and groceries, and the simple miracle of a paycheck clearing on time. 2. The proposal. I'd been working for him for almost a year when everything changed. It was late winter. The kind of Boston cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. That day, I remember dusting the piano in the sitting room, the one no one ever played, when he came in. He didn't usually come in when I was working. He stood there for a long moment, just watching the snow fall through the big bay window. Then, without turning to me, he said quietly, "Clara, I wonder if you'd ever consider something unusual." I turned, thinking maybe he needed me to stay late. Instead, he asked me to sit. He looked pale that day, the way someone does when they've been thinking too hard. His eyes, gray, calm and careful, met mine. Then he said it. Plain, simple, without drama. "I'd like to marry you." At first I laughed, not because I thought it was funny, but because I didn't know how else to react. He wasn't joking. He told me he didn't want romance or grand gestures. He said he was tired of being alone, that he was looking for someone steady, someone who could help him manage his home, his health, and his life, in exchange for stability. It would be a marriage of companionship, he said, not obligation. I remember my heart beating fast, not from excitement, but from disbelief. He was nearly 60. I was 30. He was wealthy. I was struggling to make rent. It sounded absurd, but also strangely reasonable. He wasn't offering love. He was offering safety. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment staring at the cracked ceiling. My phone buzzed with a late notice from the electric company. The world felt heavy. By morning I'd made up my mind. I told him yes. 3. The gentleman. We married quietly at City Hall. No guests, no flowers, no music. He wore a dark gray suit. I wore a cream dress I found on clearance. When the clerk asked if I took him for better or for worse, I said yes, not because I believed in forever, but because I believed in survival. Moving into his house didn't feel strange. I'd already spent a year there, after all. The only difference was now I slept in a different room. At first it felt like a business arrangement, 2 people living parallel lives under one roof. He had his study, his books, his routines. I had the household to manage, but something about him softened me. He was a gentleman in every sense. He'd always pull out my chair, offer me tea, ask about my day, even when I had nothing new to tell. He never raised his voice, never made me feel small, and in the quiet rhythm of our days, the soft scrape of cutlery at dinner, the way he'd hum faintly when reading, something inside me began to shift. I started looking forward to our evenings. He'd pour us each a glass of wine and tell stories about the old Boston, back when the city still smelled like iron and salt, when you could see the ships pulling in from the harbor. He wasn't lonely company. He was peaceful company. Sometimes peace is the rarest kind of love. 4. Rumors of a curse. But peace has a way of inviting fear when you've lived your life waiting for struggle. The housekeeper before me, an older woman named Ruth, once said, "All his wives die too young, Clara. You best be careful." She meant well, but I brushed it off. Until one night when I found him sitting in the dark library, staring at an old photograph of his first wife. He didn't notice me at first. His hands trembled slightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper. They were both good women, kind women. I wasn't meant to outlive them. There was pain in those words, not guilt, but grief that never quite left. I sat down across from him and said softly, "You're not cursed. You're just someone who's loved and lost." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple." Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but I started to understand then that loneliness can be its own kind of curse, one you survive by pretending you're already fine. 5. Learning to care.
Love didn't come to me like lightning. It came quietly, like spring arriving after a long Boston winter. He'd leave little notes for me in the kitchen, reminders to eat, to rest. Sometimes he'd buy flowers and leave them by the window. I found myself caring, not because of duty, but because he treated me as if I mattered. There was one evening I'll never forget. We'd had dinner, roasted chicken, red wine, soft jazz playing from his old turntable. When the power flickered out, Boston storms love to do that. I lit candles. The house glowed golden, and for a moment it felt like time stopped. He looked at me across the table and said, "You've brought life back into this house." And I realized, sitting there in that warm half-darkness, that I'd stopped counting my reasons for saying yes. 6. His decline. The change came slowly, the way autumn creeps in unnoticed until the leaves are already falling. He started forgetting small things, then big things. Doctor's appointments, names, places. They called it a degenerative condition, such a clean word for such a cruel thing. I became his caretaker again, not by contract but by heart. Some days he'd mistake me for one of his late wives. He'd say, "Margaret, you look beautiful today," and I'd just smile, knowing that correcting him would only break his peace. But then there were days he remembered everything, days when he'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "You've been my greatest kindness." Those were the days that kept me breathing. 7. The final letter. It was early spring when he passed. Soft rain fell that morning, tapping gently against the windows like a lullaby. He'd asked to sit by the window, said he wanted to watch the magnolia tree bloom one last time. I held his hand until his breathing slowed, then stopped. No drama, no pain, just quiet. When the doctor left and the house fell still again, I found an envelope on his desk, my name written in his careful handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Clara, you came into my life as light comes into a room that's forgotten its windows. I asked for companionship and you gave me love. If there is such a thing as a curse, you broke it. Don't mourn me long, live the life I wished I'd given you sooner. All my love, Henry." I cried, not from loss but from gratitude, because for once in my life I'd been loved without condition. 8. Now, in 2025, it's been 2 years since he passed. Boston hasn't changed much. The same gray skies, the same rush hour horns, the same kind of ordinary days that make up a life. I still live in the brownstone, not as a maid, not as a wife, but as someone finally at peace. I work part-time at a small flower shop now. Every morning I bring home a new bouquet, lilies, hydrangeas, whatever's in season, and place them by the window where he used to sit. Sometimes I still talk to him, out loud. Just simple things, about the weather, the neighbors, how the magnolia bloomed early this year. I don't expect answers, but I like to think he hears me. People often ask if I ever loved him, and I always say not at first. Because the truth is, love didn't come rushing in like thunder. It crept in quietly and stayed. I didn't marry him for romance or passion. I married him for peace, and somewhere along the way I found both. He used to say, "There are many kinds of love, Clara. The loud kind that burns, and the quiet kind that stays." I think I understand now. The quiet kind never really leaves. When I walk through the city now, I see couples rushing, people holding hands, life unfolding everywhere, and I smile, because for all its imperfect timing and unlikely beginnings, my story wasn't tragic, it was just real. Love didn't save me, but it taught me that even the smallest acts, a cup of tea, a steady hand, a gentle word, can build a kind of forever. My name is Clara. I was once a maid. I became a wife, and though the man I loved is gone, his kindness still fills this house, like light through a window. End of story.